how do we even kick this one off?
I know. I thought introing with Dave was hard.
Yeah. Past guests, we always typically have an idea of how we're going to intro, but we
Or
don't
even what we're
necessarily
gonna
know. A
talk
lot of
about.
times we wing it.
Yeah.
But this one, I think you could say is very unique for us, as well as, I mean, this is a big high profile guest compared to every other guest we've had.
One could
I'm
argue,
a little nervous right now. Usually I don't get nervous anymore with most of our guests, but I'm a little nervous.
One could argue that there is like no bad way to intro, because like whatever you start on, Joanne's probably like been involved very heavily in.
Better storyteller than us.
And knows more than we do. So.
No, I definitely don't, especially not about beer and running miles afterward.
Well, we thought that veganism, Korean food, it just blends so well with running and beer that
totally.
we had to have you on,
obvious.
Joanne. So,
It's so obvious why I'm on this podcast.
you know, I listened to the Rich Roll podcast with you, and I just thought he did such a terrible job. No, I'm just kidding.
No, obviously somebody needed to clean it up.
Yes, I was like, he has so many holes in the story. He missed out on all these pieces of the plot. Completely met, no conflict.
I'll make sure he gets that memo.
Good. Please do. I would love to meet Rich someday. That is the goal.
Okay,
If I had to pick one
see.
podcast to listen to the rest of my life, I might pick his over our own, to be perfectly honest, because I learned a lot from Rich.
You might have to check my Spotify Wrapped. He might be higher than ours.
So we're fortunate to be with Joanne, the Korean vegan, today in her home, and a number of reasons that we were able to make this happen, but one being very cool that we live like less than a mile apart.
Oh, perfect.
That is awesome, as well as both part of the same running club here in
Yes.
Chicago. So I knew you before, well, I knew you when you were, famous still, but less famous than you are now.
I'm not famous.
Arguably a lot more famous now. Maybe let's just start there. In Chicago, knowing you through the running scene, how is the running part of your life going right now? You started running in 2013 and you've come a long way since then. So how's the running piece?
Yeah. So I am, first of all, for your audience, everyone should know, I am a recreational runner at best. I'm otherwise known as the slowest runner on our running club, which I'm totally okay with, but I just want to make sure we manage expectations here. Okay. I'm not a beer mile champion. I actually don't drink beer because I'm allergic to alcohol. So I just want to set that stage. Running has been going okay. I'm actually in the middle of what I'm calling my 30-day challenge to get back into running form. I ran the Chicago Marathon in early October, thinking that it would be a good idea to launch my first book and train for a marathon at the same time. And in retrospect, I'm not sure I would do things exactly the same way. It was by far the most agonizing, painful, and slowest marathon I've ever run, my fifth. And a couple, I think like maybe 10 days, I gave myself 10 days to fully recover from the marathon. And I went on a run and I rolled my ankle on an acorn again.
Oh, no.
Literally, like almost in the same place too.
Oh, man.
And as a result of this was the worst. I've done it multiple times, but this one I actually ended up having to go to a clinic and pick up a pair of crutches because I could not walk.
No. Oh, gosh.
And it was so painful. So it was the worst. And my ankle is still a little tiny bit twingy. So I'm slowly getting back to today. I ran 6 miles, which is the longest.
There we go.
Yeah, it was the longest distance I've gone since running the marathon. So that's where it's at. It's actually kind of nice. Like it's nice to take it easy, not be training for anything right now and just trying to get back to where I was.
I'm actually surprised. I feel like every marathoner, once you finish a marathon, you already have in mind what your next marathon is going to be, but you don't.
No, I don't. And I think it was partially because I was so miserable in Chicago. Like it was so bad. And then also because I literally, October 10th was the marathon. October 11th, I had a photo shoot and I was like, I'm just letting you know, like the photographer, I was like, I'm letting you know, like I literally can't move. So just, you're going to have to like position me in very normal positions. And then October 12th was my book launch. And I literally had to fly to New York that night. And I've been traveling nonstop ever since. This is my first like real long time at home since that day.
So assuming the book launch went better than the marathon.
Yes, it did. It did. I actually placed, when it came to the book.
On the podium.
Yeah, I made it on the podium, number 3. But not so with, honestly, Dan, our coach, we kind of both decided like our only goal. Yes, that's my book.
There we go. Flashing it for the camera here.
There you go. The only goal that I had was to finish the race. I didn't think it would take me quite as long as it did. But I literally went to the bathroom every single time I saw a porta potty. So I think that really contributed.
Those days happen. Yes.
I was like, I'm taking every excuse to not run right now. But normally I am exactly that way. I have a race picked out. As soon as I cross that finish line, okay, I'm going to do Indy next, or I'm going to do Houston next, or, any number of different ones.
Yeah, I think, marathon training arguably harder than, anything else, where it's like you have to dedicate to do a marathon really well. You have to dedicate so much time. And yeah, between like being a lawyer and book launch and everything you're doing on socials, I can't even imagine. And like even our last guest we just had, Ben True, like having a baby like a month or two before his New York City Marathon, I was just like, the timing, not ideal. Not ideal. So you got to be happy with whatever comes out of that and not hold yourself to too high of standards,
One thing that I would be interested to know that we've asked a few guests before is like, what's your time split between like your commitments as a partner, as like for all of your content, for your book launch, like where do you spend your time day to day, right? Like for the past week or so?
Well, for the past week, it's very different than what it was when I was training, right? Right now, I basically do no law. The only law that I really did was I went to my office yesterday, I think, for the first time since the book launch to sign books. So that's what I did. And I caught up with some of my partners or former partners and, took care of some administrative items that my assistant had left for me. So that's really all I do. I maybe look at my emails, every once and again and just laugh at how I don't need to respond to any of them. So it's just so wonderful. So I would say like 1% is law. And then, content creation right now, basically when I'm not sleeping and I'm not running, and even while I'm running, I have my phone with me to capture footage, I'm doing content creation. So it's like every waking moment of the day right now.
What, obviously content creation and practicing law are very different. Like what of your quote unquote past life do you bring into the content creation arm now?
Well, that's a really good question, Adam. I think that, I don't know if you guys listen to the podcast with David Epstein. Like I
have heard. Yeah.
Yeah. That is like one of my, like, that was definitely a light bulb podcast for me. It really helped me to reshape the way that I thought about my career and my future. And the thing that I love about his book, Range, and his whole thesis is like, everything that you've done, every failure that you've had can be leveraged for your future. So instead of thinking of it as a waste, think of it as experience that you can use now to create a very unique career, right? Because there's nobody who's going to be identical to you if you utilize that as your kind of lead up to whatever it is your next chapter. And so like for the law, obviously writing is a huge portion of what I do now. I write a lot as a cookbook author, as a content creator. I'm writing all the scripts and I'm, writing all the captions and things like this. So I'm writing a lot. And I learned to write very clearly and succinctly as a lawyer because I was always under word count limits. Or page count limits. And now I'm just under time limits, right?
Yep.
And I also learned how to advocate. That's my job. I was an advocate. So now I'm just advocating different groups and different messages, right? So definitely communication is something that I honed over 17 years in my career as a lawyer. I think also time management and learning how to effectively manage multiple streams of work at once. So those are things that I definitely still use from my career as a lawyer.
Yeah. And we've actually talked about this where I think it can, even though there are obviously direct overlaps, communications, all those pieces, but being that there are differences, we've talked about how like the podcast is like a break from our normal day job. So you got to switch it up. So it's nice to get the enjoyment out of doing something that's different from what you get to do day to day and like switching it up. So I think even if it's not direct, like my skill sets at work don't necessarily directly impact my skill sets doing a podcast. They like complement each other in that it's like triggering a different part of your brain. Like you're doing something different to switch it up as well. So I can see that being a big part of it. So do you, I guess, especially in these last couple of years, I was curious on, still practicing law, et cetera. Do you get the same, like over time, did that enjoyment from content creation, sharing your stories, did that continue to grow and law kind of went down? And so that overtook it? Is that kind of how you looked at when the timing would be right to make the transition? Or did you still do you still get the same fire from doing law? You just don't have enough hours in the day to do both of them. So you have to pick one or the other.
I would say that my appreciation for my career actually grew as I became more confident in my job. So I would say the first 3 years, and this is probably true for many junior associates at a large law firm, were the most difficult years. And the years where I felt most at risk of leaving my job. Like I literally wanted to work for McDonald's during the first 3 years. I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I don't know what I was thinking, I just wanted to do any job. I was like, I could be a barista at Starbucks. I could be the traffic reporter on the news. I could do anything other than this job. So I was really unhappy at my job the first 3 years. Not because it was a bad job. It was a fantastic job, but just because I was so not confident and I was constantly second guessing, do I have the aptitude for this? Like maybe I'm not smart enough or good enough or strong enough or tough enough for this. And that sort of second guessing is agonizing on every level.
It also leads to it takes so much longer to do your job if you second guess what you're doing.
Very true. Very true.
I mean, and this is why, the complaint of every partner is, oh, that associate's so inefficient, right?
Right.
Because it takes them so much longer and we bill by the hour. So that's kind of important. I think as I grew more mature in my career, I became more confident. And as a result of that, I had so much more autonomy over the direction of my career and what I wanted to do. Like, well, I don't want to do this kind of law. So I'm not. I'm going to do this. I started looking into Bitcoin and crypto and stuff like that because I was just interested in it, and that ultimately became a big part of my practice towards the end of my, legal career. So I think I actually enjoyed it more, but the problem was I never enjoyed it enough. Creating content. And I remember I had this moment where this was last year. I woke up super early and I just started editing a YouTube video. And I knew that I had to turn to a legal meeting with a client at around 8:30. And I was working on it for about an hour and a half. And it was right around that time where I needed to shift gears. And I was like, man, it would be so cool if I could just edit videos all day. Why can't I do that?
You can feel the excitement dial down.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're speaking my language.
And I was like, man, I wish I could just do this. Wouldn't that be so great? And at that time, I had no real belief that I could switch careers. But I remember that moment so vividly. And now I'm so grateful that that is now what I do every day.
So at that moment, were you trying to kind of scheme up a way that you could make it your full-time job, or was it still kind of a long shot for you?
I think in my head, I believed it was a long shot for a very long time. It wasn't until I signed with my agent and literally I started getting paychecks as big as my law firm paycheck that I was like, oh, okay. I could actually make a career out of this. But before that, I had never monetized the Korean vegan before.
Right, yeah.
So I had no idea branding and all those stuff. I just was so foreign to me. And it wasn't until I started working with somebody who was able to help me monetize the Korean vegan that I saw its potential as a business. And it wasn't until then, and that was probably around May of this year, that I was like, oh, well, maybe I could make a viable business out of this. And maybe I should be allowed to dream a little bit. I'm 42. Right. I think I've earned this right to maybe dream a little bit.
Yeah. And it is hard to fathom because that content creator, YouTuber, TikTok or whatever, that job didn't exist 10 years ago. Like it's
Totally.
true for everybody. It's not just you. It's like everyone, and you get advice from mentors that are older than you, your parents, and they didn't have that as an option growing up. So they don't know about that. They can't advise you on it. So you almost do have to just like follow your heart and really see for yourself or take a leap of faith for yourself
It was one of the most interesting experience. I was, my brother teaches high school, and I was, there for he teaches AP computer science, and I was there just because my job deals with that. I majored in computer science, and I was talking to these high school kids, and like all of their questions about computer science were like related to like content creation, NFTs, cryptocurrency. And I was like, holy shit. Like if I was able to like think like that when I like, or just have that as foresight, an option.
Yeah.
When I was in high school, like, and they're like asking me like, oh, was the degree worth it? Like, or should I just like go and mint NFTs? I'm like,
oh my gosh.
Like, man, we would have, we should be in the NFT business instead of our podcast.
Oh my God. That's amazing. Yeah. Well, you can NFT your podcast. So
we were talking about the
walk here. So you started the Korean Vegan, the website in 2016.
Yes.
And then what was the order of the things that rolled out? So now you have TikTok's your biggest following, but you also have a big following on Instagram, YouTube. You have the book. So I guess what was that process? So how long was it just, blog and photo and recipes and that and all of that, and then shifting to social media, and then how did you roll out the social media over time? Sorry to interrupt this exciting program, but quick plug, Allworld, ALWRLD.com, the leader in clean sport, sustainable activewear, eco-friendly. Head over to their website and use code BeerMile15, that's all one word, for 15% off everything in the store. And that is also free domestic shipping.
I mean, this is really good reminders just because I always am so late to buying Christmas presents.
Exactly.
Go buy your people their gifts,
It's so simple. And believe it or not, the shirts that we're wearing from recycled, upcycled, natural biodegradable materials. This shirt that Adam is wearing is actually 100% on the clean score. It's made of one-of-a-kind seaweed-derived fabric called Sea Cell.
I'm wearing seaweed right
Dude, you're wearing seaweed.
That's kind of nuts.
100% clean.
That's really trippy.
Isn't that nuts?
It doesn't feel like seaweed.
I know.
That would probably be more uncomfortable.
It feels like your most comfortable activewear you could imagine. Allworld.com, ALWRLD.com. BeerMile15 is the code.
So I actually started YouTube first, and it was because of Anthony. He told me to. He was like trying to get me to be excited about being vegan, which I wasn't. I really didn't like it. I was like,
did he originally convince you to make the switch?
Gotcha. Yeah. So he went vegan first, and he propagandized me. No, just kidding. He just stuffed my brain with all the books and all the movies, and they were really compelling, including Rituals, Finding Ultra, and Cowspiracy.
It kind of feels like a conspiracy theory that you're like actually bought into.
Yeah, no, totally. At first
just
I was
indoctrinized.
At first I was like very skeptical because I was paleo. So I just was the exact opposite of vegan in many ways. And I had just totally believed that veganism was unhealthy. And, so reading Rich's book, I told him this during the podcast, I was like, your book was really inspiring. And then you got to the part where you stopped eating meat and you just lost me. That's kind of how it was. But I wanted to see where my relationship with Anthony was going to go. And I felt that joining him in this adventure of his was part of that. And so I did. And he was trying to encourage me. And he was like, your food is so good. You should start a YouTube channel called The Korean Vegan, where you share your recipes. So I literally started a YouTube channel that day called The Korean Vegan. Very nice. Also started an Instagram and a Facebook page. And that's all it was for a while, because I didn't want to do a website because I thought it was too much work. But then eventually... But
still all on the same day.
Yes, all on the same day.
Some coordination around it.
Yes. Well, I'm that type of person. Like, I'm not going to...
let me get the...
I was going to say, you have to make sure that you get the handle on each of them.
Let me get the handles.
Exactly. So I was like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this right.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I did that. And then I did the website a little bit later that year. And then I think 2017 was when I started sharing my stories on Instagram. So before that, it was just recipes like, oh, look at this recipe I made. I veganized this, I veganized that. And 2017 is when I started taking the captions on Instagram and really kind of writing more than sharing recipes. And I think that caught the attention of certain people. And ultimately, that led to me being introduced to a literary agent in 2017.
Okay.
And he was the one who wanted to work with me to arrive at a book deal. So over the year 2017 to 2018, we worked on a book proposal. It doesn't normally take that long, but I was a partner at a law firm. So it took me a year actually to write a book proposal. And within a week of shopping that book proposal out, we had an offer from the largest publisher in the United States, just Penguin Random House. And we ironed out that book deal, and I had a book deal signed by the end of 2018. So all of that happened while I was still pretty small beans. I had like 37,000 followers on Instagram, and that's it. My YouTube went nowhere. It was just too hard for me to do YouTube. I just did Instagram and Facebook. And everything was fine. I just continued to do that. And then in 2020, I started TikTok. And all of a sudden, everything changed.
Yeah. That's crazy. I was just looking back to confirm, because I thought you had said you started it in 2020, and then I scrolled back to your first video. I was like, "There's no way she got to 2.7 million followers in 1 year. There's no way." I had to confirm for myself.
Yeah.
But it is crazy like that. I mean, we have a TikTok. We had 50 followers for the longest time. We had one video that we put up, or TikTok, whatever you call it. It's at 1 million views, just that one though. The rest of ours have 1,500. It's crazy how that works on TikTok.
Yeah.
It's just so different than the other platforms that you can
absolutely
actually do that.
Well, now I have to look up your viral video.
It wasn't even a good one. It's and this is
which one is the million?
It's literally just clips from the beer mile, the world championship.
Oh, right.
Just us, the group of people just chugging the beer, and then it's to the song it's about time for a drink. It's a country song. I did it super quick. I was like, this is going to be stupid, but whatever. It clicked in my head. I was just I'll put it out. I would have guessed that any other video that I put up on TikTok would have done better, but it's that's part of it, is you can't predict.
You cannot predict. My first viral video was the same thing. I literally threw my phone up against the wall, horrible lighting.
Yeah.
I had no idea how to use captions. It was so ugly, and no voiceover, just Anthony in the background playing piano. And what's
your theory for why it took off?
There are a couple theories, right? Number one, it was one of my earlier videos, and TikTok theoretically likes to reward new creators by making one of their videos go viral, usually earlier on. And so it kind of this is a theory. It hasn't been proven, but I've heard it anecdotally so many times, and it certainly happened to me. So they try to reel you in, and what better?
It makes total sense.
Yeah.
That's smart.
Give you a little sugar,
little taste,
Yeah.
so to keep you coming back for more, right?
Yep.
So there's that. Also, I think the problem with a lot of videos is that you overthink it, and then your audience can tell you overthought it, and they don't like that, So either they want a perfectly polished experience like my videos now are, or they want something totally on the opposite side of that, where there's almost no thought put into it. And so that might have a lot to do with why it was so successful. I can also tell you the novelty of a beer mile in your world, and perhaps even a little bit in mine. That's beer mile, totally. Obvious, we have a champion in our team, blah, 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 But for TikTok, what? This guy's drinking beer and running miles? What the hell?
There does have to be
there's 20 guys next to each other chugging beers together.
Yeah.
It's very strange.
It is very strange to them. And so
That's
for
true.
them, it is wow, this is crazy,
Yeah. I always assumed that the book, it makes total sense when you're explaining the timeline. I always assumed the book deal came much later on, because I guess in my mind, in kind of a question that I wanted to get to was around you using stories instead of saying then add whatever 2 cups of this and 2 teaspoons of that. You're actually telling a story along with it, and I think that that is what makes it unique from the oversaturated just recipes, cooking? Because I know personally countless people that have a food Insta and whatever, and to stand out from that, it's surprising to me that you were able to get a lit agent interested that early in what you were doing, just because there are so many people that are great cooks and have great photography and food Instas and everything else. So did they like explain exactly what was it, because you started incorporating those stories? Like that was what caught their eye? Okay.
Yes. So I would say, well, let me be very clear about this. And it wasn't like I had lit agents like trolling or, going through my stuff. What actually ended up happening was I started incorporating these stories, right? And it caught the attention of the biggest vegan Instagram account at that time, who now happens to be one of my closest friends, right? So Kim Julie, she owns Best of Vegan.
Okay.
And, that was like 1 million+ followers at the time. And she loved my writing. She was a writer. She was a poet before she started her account. So she loved my writing. She was like, yeah, your recipes are great too, but I really love your writing. Yeah. And so she introduced me to her lit agent. And that's how it all really happened. And, I had she started following me when I had 200 Instagram followers.
Wow.
And so that's why I always tell people, you never know who's following you. Even if you have only 1,000 followers, if Oprah is one of those followers, it doesn't matter that you only have 1,000, right? And to me, in my sort of humble way, Kim Julie was my Oprah. Mm-hmm. She was one of the most important persons in that sphere, and she was following me from literally almost the beginning. And as a result of that, it turned into a career where I now get to tell people I am a writer.
Exactly. So what was that process like then, end to end writing the book? Was it, I'm assuming, very iterative, like you would put together some recipes? And because I'm also curious too, like cooking in the book, you have to actually purchase all the ingredients, cook it, master the recipe. So there's a lot of not just time investment, but like monetary investment as well. And just like all that iterative process of mastering it versus you could say like a standard book, you're just sitting and just standing.
Sure.
Yeah. You're just sitting there, just writing. So there's a whole, like the photography piece of it and like so many things coming together. So
you like came in with a set of recipes at least and went off of that, or was it just like, hey, we need to write a book?
No, they just knew they wanted her. They didn't know what it was going to look like yet, but they're like, we need her for sure.
I mean, both my agent and ultimately my editor at Penguin, they were like, your recipes are great, but really it's, it's your photography and your writing, so like, which actually ironically was interesting because when they got my first manuscript, they're like, okay, we need more recipes and less writing, but that's a different thing. But so like, I didn't have any set recipes. I had like an outline of like, these are the kinds of recipes that I want for each chapter, blah, blah, blah. And even that ended up getting scrapped. Like that wasn't what we ended up with, but you're right. It can be an expensive process, not just from my perspective, but from the publisher's perspective, right? They probably in many ways would make, even more money if there wasn't a photography component to it, because then they could save on ink costs and, things like that. But, I'm very fortunate. I had a full-time job that allowed me to set aside some money to fund my hobbies. And that's what I did. And, to some degree, like, okay, well, I'm going to eat,
that's true.
Like, well, it's like,
it's not like it's going to waste.
Yeah.
Right?
I have to spend money on groceries anyway.
Right. That's true.
I think where it was expensive was my photography equipment. Yeah. Some of the travel that I needed to do, I went to Korea with my family to do some research and to, basically that's the last chapter of the book. So, those things were expensive, and I'm very grateful for my job because that allowed me to do this book in a way that I could be very proud of and feel good about.
Yeah. And so when you sign that publishing deal, do you get like a stipend over time, or how does even the structure of that work? Because you also mentioned that May of this year was when you really like started actually getting paid well for the Korean vegan. So like what is the makeup or breakdown of that?
Yeah. So I received an advance as part of my book deal, and I was overjoyed with my advance. Like we've already agreed to my second book deal. So now I can say I was very happy with my first advance. But like, cause I had 37,000 followers. I was like, oh my God, and I remember when I told my parents, they like literally fell out of their chairs. chairs and stuff like that. But I didn't realize that it gets paid in 4 parts. And so I only saw like a very small portion of it for most of the writing of the book, and certainly would not have been enough to pay all of my expenses for the book. So, definitely I had to inject my own capital into that. And like I said, it wasn't really until this past year that I started seeing like real money and revenue for the Korean vegan.
Got it. That makes total sense.
I guess a more like blunt question is like how much runway did you give yourself financially to make it happen?
Sorry to interrupt this exciting program, but quick plug, Allworld, ALWRLD.com, the leader in clean sport, sustainable activewear, eco-friendly. Head over to their website and use code BeerMile15, that's all one word, for 15% off everything in the store. And that is also free domestic shipping.
I mean, this is really good reminders just because I always am so late to buying Christmas presents.
Exactly.
Go buy your people their gifts, you know?
It's so simple. And believe it or not, the shirts that we're wearing from recycled, upcycled, natural biodegradable materials. This shirt that Adam is wearing is actually 100% on the clean score. It's made of one-of-a-kind seaweed-derived fabric called Sea Cell.
I'm wearing seaweed right
Dude, you're wearing seaweed.
That's kind of nuts.
100% clean.
That's really trippy.
Isn't that nuts?
It doesn't feel like seaweed.
I know.
It would probably be more uncomfortable.
It feels like your most comfortable activewear you could imagine. Allworld.com, ALWRLD.com. BeerMile15 is the code.
Yeah, so basically I always had in my head, I will not quit my job unless I have a full year's worth of rent, my current rent, like assuming that I continue to live where I live, right?
Right.
So I had to have a year's worth of rent set aside and socked away. And I would, without touching my retirement money or anything like that, So the other tricky thing with it was that because I'm a partner at my firm, my tax liability is very different than the average person. So you guys get your tax probably withdrawn out of each paycheck, right? So you don't even see the money. I have to make estimated tax payments, and they're based upon, my ownership in the firm. So it's somewhat based upon how well the firm does. So it's very tricky for me. And that like kind of tax liability hangs over my head every year.
Yeah.
So that was another thing. I was like, I need to have a year's worth of rent set aside plus all the tax payments that I need to make set aside
slightly
too.
overestimating.
Yeah, exactly. So it like I had to feel very comfortable. Now, ironically, luckily, I had the most successful year of my career the year during COVID. The firm had an incredibly up year. Weirdly enough, right? And so I had the best year of my career. So I was able to take my year-end distribution and just put it away. And I'm like, there's my rent for a year.
Nice. Yeah, that's nice how that works out.
It was very everything kind of worked out very well for me. And, I like to believe in signs, and I like to believe in the universe kind of giving you nudges. And I have that sort of element of spirituality in my outlook. And I do think in some ways the universe was trying to tell me I will protect you. You do this and you'll be okay. And part of that is also having Anthony, having a partner like that in my life also makes me feel like I'm making a reasonable and strategic decision that is defendable.
Definitely. So for the aspiring young content creators out there, I'm assuming the book is now going forward is going to be your main income as a content creator. So are there ways to monetize TikTok and Instagram and YouTube well? I mean, obviously there's ad money on YouTube, or you can do affiliate deals or partnership deals and promote products on other platforms. But is there other successful tips or tricks that you're willing to share on how do you monetize those, unless you're really just driving people towards something else, like a subscription or a book or some other source of revenue?
I think that for me, it is the latter. I'm building a brand in order to leverage success from other things as a writer, if I ever do something on TV, things like that. So it's all sort of funneling towards a bigger picture for me. And for the next 5 years, as far as I can tell, that's likely going to remain the case. However, it would be silly of me as a business owner to neglect the revenue potential of some of these platforms. For example, YouTube. That ad revenue is no joke, man.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
It is really something to pay attention to. And why not do something that not only generates revenue, but is actually accretive to your brand in any event, right?
Exactly.
So that's important. I also have a meal planner that I launched earlier in the year, and that is also another source of pretty steady monthly revenue for us. So those are all like things outside of social media, but that you can use social media for in order to kind of, like you said, increase awareness of the brand and to generate conversion. I think for TikTok, the most substantial form of revenue generation that happens there is through brand deals.
Yeah.
And even they're a little tricky because a lot of brands are just not sure about TikTok yet.
Yeah.
They're still learning. There's a learning curve. It's not like Instagram or YouTube where they've got a track record, right? They don't have a lot of data on TikTok yet. But I will say my most lucrative deal has been for a TikTok branding situation.
It seems like it should be obvious because you look at the numbers and you're going to get more views on TikTok than you're going to get elsewhere.
Yes.
So it seems like it should be obvious, but
if that's what they want, some brands want conversion.
Yeah.
And in
True,
that case,
true.
then I would
And you
suggest
can't
YouTube.
and you can't really measure that with TikTok as of today.
Yeah.
TikTok is too unpredictable in
It
order
is.
to ensure some level of conversion. But if you want views and impressions and reach, I mean, I was thinking like in some of my TikToks probably have a broader reach than if I were on like a national television show. Just because I'm get so many more eyeballs.
I guess it also kind of depends on like what audience are you trying to reach, because obviously not every single demographic is on TikTok.
yeah, I was going to say my parents saw you on TV.
Oh, really?
But like, I mean, I don't watch TV, so like I would never see you there. So I'll see you on TikTok,
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, but you also don't like mindlessly scroll TikTok like I do.
I don't use TikTok as much, but TikTok still knows that I like the Korean vegan, so it puts it in my
If they
algorithm.
know that you're plant-based or slanting that direction.
Yeah, exactly. And they know that. They even if you don't publicly put it anywhere, they found it one piece of data at some point somewhere, or your purchase history or whatever. So
Okay, I want Joanne to judge Chris and I, and I don't know how to pitch this, but
oh boy, I don't know where you're going with this.
Judge you.
yeah, I want
was
you to
not in the
judge us.
script.
I want you to judge us on this. So, my wife recently told me that I have to take out vegetarian from my Instagram bio because I like to play around. If I've had a few beers and there's if there's like hot pockets at the bar, I'm gonna have hot pockets.
And there might be fake meat in there.
fake meat in there.
Wait, why is that fake meat?
There might be meat in the hot
there's
pocket.
meat in there, but not,
okay. So if it's like a sausage hot pocket, and I would say, look, to me, words are words. I think if you're selling something that's related to your vegetarianism, then I think you have a responsibility to be pretty clear about what that means, objectively.
Yeah.
So then I think that's fair. But for me, I would never, I can't call myself the Korean vegan and eat sausage hot pockets. That's not going to work, right? But at the same time, I've talked about this before. I find labels and proxies to be of limited value from a philosophical standpoint. I think they engender gatekeeping in a very not helpful way.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think that it really restricts a person's empowerment when it comes to how can I make more compassionate decisions or more conscientious decisions. Does it have to be black and white? Yeah. And I don't like that. But, you do you, man. Whatever you want to do.
All right. Hopefully our wives listen to this one.
Yeah. And you've talked about this a little bit before, and especially from the Korean culture, meat being a big part of it. And so for the aspiring or someone who is, I guess, mostly vegan or mostly plant-based, even the social aspect of you go to a wedding and there's literally no food to eat that's not meat based,
Right.
at least in especially in the Midwest, in the US, I'd say it's very heavy in this, but I guess what's your advice in that case where either pressure from society or direct family, because you've had to deal with this direct family, or being like opportunities as well, or you're at a work dinner and you're with a client and they're at a steakhouse and that's where they want to go, and it's like, oh man, are they gonna think less of me and not want to do business with me if I don't like eat this steak? Like, what advice do you have for people in those situations?
I think the most important thing is staying true to your values. You have to understand what your values are before you put yourself into these crosshairs, right? So if you haven't had that little 30-minute chat with yourself where you're like, okay, what is important to me actually? Like, why do I eat this way?
Very
like
true.
if you don't do that and you walk into a wedding and all they have is sausage hot pockets, then, you're much more at risk to do something that might compromise your values because you don't really know what they are, right? So I think the number one thing you have to do is sit down and figure out, well, what's important to you? Are you eating this way for your health? Are you eating this way because you are against cruelty to animals? Are you eating this way because of something else? Like because it's something important to your family? I don't know. Like it doesn't. I'm not here to judge why you do it, but you got to know what that is before you walk into that situation. And then once you have that sort of in place, it becomes much easier to at least figure out, well, this is like, okay, I'm not compromising this, right?
Is this for or against my values?
Exactly.
It's much more black and white if you've already had like the shower conversation.
Yeah,
Okay,
I love that, the
yeah.
shower conversation. And then you can plan for it, right? Like then it becomes easier. Like, for example, it always this time of year, holidays, it becomes a little bit tougher for us, dealing with family members and friends and social situations, although less so with COVID, right? But, I now know, like, okay, if we have like family Thanksgiving, I got to bring my food. I got to talk to my mom and make sure that she's aware, like, can you make this? And, what are you able to do? And da-da-da-da-da. And it was perfectly fine. Absolutely beautiful. And sometimes we do go to weddings and we eat nothing. Like literally.
You eat your food before.
Or we go to the, Chipotle 2 doors down,
Right.
If necessary. Like that's what we do. But if you're not like a strict vegan, and you have that sort of flexibility and latitude to kind of make discretionary choices like that, then that's up to you. But it's really all the most danger you could do to yourself and the most injury you could do to yourself is compromising your values. So it's not, eating the hot pocket. Okay?
To me, I like kind of like it's almost like drinking alcohol where I'm like, yeah, I'm going to probably feel bad afterwards, but I might still do it.
I think, and that's the thing. It's like, let's say your value set was, because you're training for a marathon. Like, let's say you're training for Boston, or maybe that's not a good example, but you're training to, BQ
Some physical
or OTP or something
achievement,
like that, right? Like something really, really important. Then your value set is determined by that, right? And so what you're actually injuring is not, you are maybe doing a little harm to your body, but more importantly, you're hurting your chances of this goal and this commitment that you made to yourself to do everything you can to reach
From
that
a
goal.
mindset perspective, probably the most.
Exactly.
For sure.
And that's why I say these injuries that are intangible and invisible are oftentimes the most pernicious.
For sure. Have you, I'm assuming this is the case, but what are some times where you've prepared a dish for someone and they didn't even know that it was vegan, but they just fell in love with it and they would have never guessed otherwise, and then you like kind of told them after the fact, you're like, oh, guess what? That was a vegan dish.
I think it's very hard for me to say that at this point because everybody knows I'm vegan.
Fair.
Like,
Okay, fair. At this
everybody
point,
knows it's very hard for me to
yeah.
trick people, and the only times I'm cooking is when I'm doing it as a vegan. So like I will say a couple of things. Like once this was I think last Christmas or last Thanksgiving, I made a pasta dish and my cousin was like, Joanne, did you just stop going vegan or something? Because it was really good. It was actually using field roast and it was really delicious. And she was like, this is amazing. And she took the rest home with her. So that was one instance. The other thing was, this is very early on when I started blogging. I was asked to do a fundraiser for a North Korean refugee fundraising event. And I made pecan pot pie, which is, in the book. And it's one of my most favorite recipes. And I made that. And there were a bunch of other real chefs, like people who owned restaurants, had culinary training and things like that. And they didn't even want to stop by my table because they're like, vegan food, blah,
It's compromising.
Yeah. I mean, like literally there were a couple people who were like kind of rude to me actually. Yeah. And then somebody brought my dessert over to them. And they came back and they're like, your dessert is amazing.
I'm sorry.
And then they wanted me to start selling my desserts out of their restaurant. Like literally. Yeah. So that was also very, very fulfilling to me. Very validating.
Free content idea. You should just post up at like some random corner in Chicago and have a dish that is vegan and a dish that has meat in it. And you don't label them. You're just like, you need to guess.
Wow. Yeah.
I was going to say, there are definitely cases of that where, I mean, especially with the
impossible.
Exactly. With the imitation products, it's hard to tell. But yeah, you also, even me, I forget that the dairy side of it too, because even like the meat is more visible if it's there or not. But then like, did it have butter? Or did it have like all those things that are all those things that are in desserts and baking usually? Those are the ones that can like really trick someone.
Getcha.
Exactly. But in a good way though, when you have the vegan dessert and you're like, oh, like it tastes the same or better as the original. And I don't feel horrible afterwards.
I will say the best Thanksgiving I had was our vegan Friendsgiving a couple of years ago.
Aww.
Was that amazing? Yeah.
Like,
I
wish I would have taken more food home because
we have a like a vegan buffalo dip that I don't know if you've had it. I don't know for sure, but my wife makes a buffalo vegan dip, but so it's like it has artichokes, and so it ends up looking like chicken, and no one has ever like detected that it's not chicken.
Really? Oh my god!
Until we tell people.
It's a secret.
It's like carrots and can't remember what all else is blended up. So it's like it looks buffalo. It's
texture,
orange, and it has the artichokes and the way
we've
it's baked, and it kind of seems like chicken.
Yeah.
And you take a bite of it, and you're just like, you would just think that it's all fats and chicken.
Oh my god! I gotta get this. I want to make it for Christmas.
Let's put it in book number 2.
But my favorite part about like any vegan imitation like that is like I'll eat it and I'm just really bad with snacking on stuff. Like I've never been like a 3-meal or like even a 5-meal guy. Like
you're just an all day as you decide to eat.
My mom and my mother-in-law would always like say I eat like a bird, but with vegan food you just like I'll I'll be full, and then a half hour later, I'm like, I could do more. I could do more.
You don't just pass out on the couch from Where do you get a lot of your ingredients in Chicago?
I get all over actually. I'll get them from H Mart, obviously.
Yeah.
Also get them from Jungbu Shijang or Jungbu Market, which is another Korean market. And then Jewel, Mariano's, Whole Foods.
They're getting a lot better at having a lot more variety of options.
Yeah.
Mariano's has like a whole aisle that you can actually shop at.
I mean, not only that, like I don't need vegan ingredients. I just need like vegetables and tofu.
Exactly.
I mean, these are basic staples of any grocery store. And
for sure.
the only time I run into issues is Korean ingredients. Like then I do need to go to a Korean grocery store.
Right. Very specific. Yeah. I was looking to see if I could find Korean beer imported somewhere around here for this. And I looked at Binny's was the best bet, and Binny's didn't have any.
They didn't have any at H Mart?
I did not go there. I did not go there. But I tried Binny's because they have all the import aisles, and I was like, there's got to be one beer there. And it was out of stock. They said sometimes they do get something from Korea, but
I don't even know Korean beer. They have this whole thing in Korea, which you couldn't do, but it's called chimek, which is chicken and beer. It's like a huge thing.
I mean,
it's a huge thing in Korea. And mek is mekju, which means beer in Korean. And so they definitely have lots of different kinds of beers. I've never had Korean beer in my life.
So is it like
either.
Chicken broth and beer?
No.
It's just chicken in it?
It's fried chicken and beer. So it's just a combination.
Okay.
And like it's so like now like in like the they'll just be like, oh, chimek 먹자, just like chicken and let's do chicken and beer tonight, you know?
It's like, absolutely. Yeah.
So you cook a lot. What are the best restaurants, I guess, both in Chicago, but also anywhere that you visited? What are some of your favorites?
Let's see. Let's start with Chicago. My two favorite restaurants in Chicago, one of them is actually in Winnetka, but the one in Chicago is Kale My Name. And it's such a wonderful story. I literally was like, oh, I'm hungry and I really don't want to do the same, 3 restaurants that I do all the time.
Right.
So I went onto Open Table and I was like, I just typed in vegan and the first one that came up was Kale My Name. And I was like, I've never even heard of this restaurant. Like, what is it? How is it possible that there's a vegan restaurant that I don't know about in Chicago? And it turned out that they started literally like a week before lockdown. And that's probably why I hadn't heard of them. And they did only like delivery and takeout for a long time. And they had just reopened their outdoor balcony or patio area. So I love that restaurant. And I go in there and the owner's like, so you don't have to feel bad, but I totally DM'd you a long time ago and you never even read it.
He recognized you? Oh, that's great.
And he's now like my best friend. Like literally, I love him. Like I'm going to go see him in LA next week because he's opening his second restaurant in Los Angeles.
Oh, amazing.
That's awesome.
So he's amazing. And then Spirit Elephant, which is another all entirely plant-based restaurant in Winnetka, Illinois, which is where I grew up. I went to high school at New Trier. So that's always really exciting. So where did you go?
Warren.
Where?
Warren
I don't
Township.
even know where that is.
That's north of New Trier.
Waukegan.
New Trier was always God, we would like run against New Trier in high school and it was the worst. Like,
Really?
They always like won everything.
Yeah.
They were good at everything. I actually had a few like suite mates in college who would like row at New Trier. And I was like, we didn't even have rowing.
We do all that. We had like a polo horse team.
Yes.
We have like every weird thing. I was like, wow, our school is weird. But I love New Trier. I love my experience there. And then across the country and even the world, ABCV is our favorite restaurant in Manhattan right now. We love Joy Cafe in Westlake, which is where we want to live because of Joy Cafe. We love Turin in Italy just because they have so many vegan restaurants there. There was a wonderful place called Soul Kitchen, which is just like completely innovative, amazing vegan food run by incredibly talented chef. And then in Rome, Mava, which is where we had our rehearsal dinner, the day before our wedding, is hands down our favorite restaurant in Rome. It's an entirely vegan restaurant. I mean, they're so mission centric. It's beautiful. And I think those are some of our favorite restaurants.
I feel like the taste and almost science aspect of vegan food has exploded in the last 10 years.
It really has. And I mean, for example, you have, places like 11 Madison Park, which was, ranked one of the greatest restaurants in the world, going plant-based. And then, there's another restaurant here in Chicago called Roka Akor, which you may have heard of. It's a Japanese restaurant. And they'll do an entirely vegan omakase for me every time I go there. And it's phenomenal.
And is that special for you or is that on the menu?
It's not on the menu.
Oh,
yeah.
Menu hack. If you're
if you're vegan. And I learned about this from my partner, David, at work. He's been vegan for, since I was a second year associate.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So for a very long time. And he's like, oh, Joanne, if you have a special occasion, I would go to Roka. They have a not on the menu vegan omakase that they can do for you. And true to his word, it was phenomenal. It's so good. So like when these amazing, talented culinary artists decide that they want to channel their talent and skill towards plant-based cuisine, it is truly remarkable. Actually, I remember right after Indy, I did Indy Monumental in 2018, I think. Right after that, I went directly to this amazing restaurant in Indianapolis. I don't remember what it's called, but I had to go there for a client meeting 2 weeks before the marathon. And I just remember their food was so good. And I went there and they did an entirely plant-based menu for me. And it was one of the best meals I'd ever had. It was so good.
Yeah. So most cities are getting some options now. I was going to say Indianapolis it's a big city. So bound to be options, but a little shocking though that there's a
in Indianapolis,
Yeah,
you
exactly.
get like but he was so talented. He was such a good chef, and he came out to talk to me afterwards. And obviously, when you got that medal on, everyone's like wants to congratulate you. But it was really nice.
That's cool. Well, listeners, if you've been to any of these places that Joanne said around the world, because I haven't been to any outside of Chicago. So
really,
well, none of the ones you listed, at least.
I've been these restaurants.
These restaurants.
You've never been to LA?
No. Sorry. I was saying if anyone has happened to be at these restaurants that you just mentioned, have you been to Kalish here in Chicago?
Yeah, I've been to Kalish. We went there a lot, like when they first opened. And we were going there pretty regularly right up until COVID, and then it just became because they're all the way in Uptown, and
they're a little west,
and so we just kind of stopped going there, and then also I'm not really into baked desserts. If I'm gonna eat dessert, I usually like to make my own. Yeah. And I always kind of viewed them sort of as a confectionery, vegan confectionery.
Yeah, fair enough.
Can I slander a place in Chicago?
Depends on what the place is. So I'm not going to give you permission until you.
My vegan option for McDonald's is native foods. Like when I'm feeling like a piece of shit, I'm like, I want a double cheeseburger with bacon with
you want the exact American equivalent of the plant-based version.
Go to native foods.
Yeah. Well, I mean that's really nice because they are very convenient. They're super convenient. Yeah.
I will say last time I went in there, like this is like peak COVID hours. I think it was probably 7 p.m. on a Tuesday, like a very off day. I went in, stood there this is the first time in 6 months that I'd gone to the actual physical location.
Yeah.
And I just stood there for 5 to 10 minutes and nobody came out because everyone was just grabbing the DoorDashes and Uber Eats. And then I just left and then I ordered it on my phone.
You're I'm just gonna do this on my phone.
Didn't have to check here.
Nobody was paying attention to me.
Oh my God. That's when you know you have hit McDonald's levels.
I was like, I guess I'm Uber Eats in this.
So a question I had on the book. I haven't tried to make any of the recipes myself yet. I only got the book recently. So for me or for anyone who is new to cooking vegan or especially Korean, which recipe in here is the best one to start with?
Oh, okay. I would say the pecan pot pie.
That was actually drawing my eye a little bit. It looked amazing.
Yeah,
still holiday season.
It's perfect
timing.
Yeah,
if I can learn to cook that well before Christmas.
That's the thing. It's so easy. It's practically brainless. I mean, especially I would recommend getting a pre-made pie crust, which you can get, at Whole Foods. They have them at Jewel, at Mariano's, I think even, and it's vegan. And all you have to do is then make the filling, which is literally dumping a bunch of ingredients into a bowl, mixing it around, and then putting it into the pie crust and then throwing it in the oven. I
can handle that.
Yeah.
That's my caveman level of cooking abilities.
It's practically not even cooking. I mean, because you're literally just mixing things. The only tricky part about it is the ingredient, which is red bean. You have to get that from a Korean grocery store or Amazon. You can order it. I often do. So that's the only tricky part. Once you get your hands on that, I saw literally hundreds of people make it for Thanksgiving, and it was really joyous to see it.
Yeah, that sounds...
How weird is that to I'm sure people post you or tag you in posts or their stories on Instagram. How weird is it to see just in my DMs, I have 400 people who made my dish for Thanksgiving.
Yeah, it is very surreal and a little nerve-wracking, to be honest, because it's let's say the two of you decided to go into coaching, how to become a beer mile champion, and you wrote a pamphlet or a little booklet out there, and then somebody was all right, I'm going to take this and I'm going to do everything that Chris and Adam tell me to do, and I better become a beer mile champion, and they totally fail. They throw up all over the place and totally bomb, right? Then you're going to feel did I...
Some accountability.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's kind of how I feel every time someone makes a recipe is like, did it go okay? Like, was it good?
Yeah.
Need like a feedback form on the website. It's
a
like,
little
was
bit.
it like, yeah.
And you do have that. You know, you have stars and ratings, and like every once in a while, I will get people be like, "This didn't work out for me at all," and I'm like, "Okay, well, what did you do exactly?"
Sure.
Like, you know, but you know, a lot of it is also just joy. Like, oh my God, like people are actually making my recipes and eating them. Like, I can't believe it.
Yeah. Was reader feedback part of the process for finalizing recipes in the book too, or did you not need to really adjust it that much?
Well, no, I did not have anyone read it other than my editor and the copywriters, right? I had Anthony. That's not true. I had Anthony read it, and you guys, you know Anthony. He does not mince words. And he was very harsh, to be honest, with my first draft. And we got into some pretty colossal fights over it. Because I think I just went into it being like, you're my husband. You're just supposed to cheerlead me. Like, you're never supposed to actually say that you don't like something.
Right.
Like, not when it was this important, right?
Yeah.
But, you know, in his mind, he was only useful to me if he was honest with me. So definitely his feedback absolutely impacted the writing. I had in terms of recipes, I had my family test a lot of them, or we developed them together, and, you know, I continue to refine them. And so I felt that they were really good. There were a few that obviously needed to be adjusted once I had them recipe tested by not myself, you know, somebody else. And they're like, I don't really understand this part, you know?
Right.
And then the copywriters, they really helped me a lot.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
I think the copy is like the main difference, because one of my biggest, especially like the few times that I try to cook, my biggest block is I Google the recipe that I want to make, and then I find like this long story that I've heard like 500 times before. But like something about the Korean vegan is like unique enough to where I'm like, oh, like a story that I actually give a shit about.
Wait, so what do you mean by the story? Are you talking about like when you click on a recipe online and
there's like
they just want to make the page as long as possible so you see more ads. So you're just talking about how they say, oh, like what is sugar? What is, you know, how like they
but it's like
what it all is first?
It's like not compelling at all. I'm like,
well, yeah, because it's not like a story though. It's like they're describing.
It is more of a description than a story.
I mean, that's just for SEO rankings.
Yeah.
They're like adding in all this like copy to make the SEO better.
I never thought about the SEO, but yeah,
that's why
true.
the ingredients are at the bottom because they just want to get all the ads.
Yeah, that is 100%
They're not actually
true.
trying to tell you a story. They just want. I mean, some cases.
To be fair, sometimes
I think
like,
some
I'm
people-
talking
I think
about
some
like the
people out there are trying.
major websites like I don't know, BettyCrocker.com or something like that. I'm just making the things. But like some of the big brands.
Betty Crocker.
It's like just skip down. I'm not talking about the more for lack of a better word, like mom and pop, like actual the recipe blogs or like people that I follow on Instagram that make recipes. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about like the
commercial
commercial
websites.
Like the recipe section of, I don't know, the USA Today or like whatever it is. I'm totally making stuff up on the actual brands.
That's a good like Chrome plugin, something that'll scroll to wherever
Well,
the recipe
I think,
actually starts.
When you delve into that world, I hear you. I mean, I used to be one of those persons too. I was like, just skip to the recipe, please.
Yeah.
You know, but then as a food writer, I then discovered, well, this is how bloggers make money, and it's really important to their living. And so I try to read them and I actually find incredibly useful nuggets like buried in them. Oftentimes, like, oh, this is how I would make it gluten-free.
Yeah.
Or like, oh, like I didn't know that you had to flatten things before you could shape them, you know? So there's a lot of really useful information. And I can tell you as a blogger, I spent hours writing it.
Well, I think the weirdest thing, and hopefully like don't take offense to it, is like if I'm reading one of your recipes, initially it is for any sort of story behind it. Whereas like if I'm just Googling something, I'm like, just give me like inject the recipe into me.
And I think that's also us being more coming from like tech and math and whatever. It's like we just want the rest. Like we want the math. Like tell me exactly each of these. And in my head, and this is wrong, I just think, oh, if you tell me combine this with this with this with this, it's just a formula, and I can spit out the food item. But that's not actually how it works because there's different things that happen as a part of that process.
Right.
Versus just I'm a very much like a one skillet, a one pot person where I'm like, just let me put everything into the one thing, cook it. It's going to be good enough. Call it a day.
This is why the pecan pot pie is your
And
recipe.
and when you said that, I was like, this is perfect for me as a gateway because I can just combine everything together, get that going, and then next time I'll step up to 2 pots.
There you go.
Maybe I can throw in a rice
Get
cooker
myself
at some point.
I just find I'm
secret to
too
everything.
impatient. And not that I actually love cooking, but I'm too impatient in the sense that I just like in my head, I'm like, I'm spending so much time
To
cooking
grok
this.
the story versus
the opportunity cost of
recipe.
like, I should be doing more work or doing more of something else. And I shouldn't feel that. That's my own problem, but I should be more like enjoying the process of cooking versus just, can I just throw all these things together as fast as I can?
I think that, whatever you derive joy from is unique. And if you derive joy from doing 2 things at once and making, yourself feel productive, then there's something to it. I will say I'm often listening to something while I'm cooking, whether it's a podcast, a book, or something like that, to do exactly what you just described, make myself at least feel like I'm not losing out on an opportunity to improve my brain or to provoke my intelligence in some way, you know?
Yeah, very true. Yeah, I actually cooked a lot more in college than I do now because in college I realize now looking back, I had a lot more time than I have now
totally.
because it's like, I'm in class for 4 hours a day and then
Man, we're talking about
Make my day.
opportunity costs and wanting to like
know.
maximize intelligence stimulation. I feel like I was just at my last like therapy session.
So you teased a second book. Is there a different angle or what are you looking at for a second book?
So the second book is, I think I'm allowed to share it, but I mean, it's probably no surprise. It's going to be a cookbook for sure. And they're going to be simpler recipes. I know that my current cookbook, one of the feedback that I've gotten from a lot of people is that it's so straightforward. It's so easy. These recipes are really clear, which makes me so happy. I wanted to write it in a way that made Korean vegan food as accessible as possible. But this next book is going to be even more accessible because it's not going to be traditional Korean food. Okay. It's going to be more fun food, like the recipes you see on my TikTok and my YouTubes, which is like, deep fried potato donuts, like things like that, which are like, wow, this is really fun. And I can make it out of all the ingredients already in my pantry. I don't need some, unusual ingredient that's hard for me to get. That's really the goal of the cookbook. It's also going to intersperse sort of life advice, which is, kind of a take on one of my popular TikTok personas, which is the Korean auntie. Which gives it, it's life advice, tough love life advice. Yep. So that's really what the book is going to be. It's going to be, an extrapolation of those TikTok videos.
God, people are going to love that.
I hope
love
so.
That. Oh, they're definitely going to love that. That's like the right food and the personality combination that it's going to hit.
I hope so. Yeah.
Korean chicken soup for the soul type.
A little bit.
vibes.
Kind of like, that's exactly right. Only with actual recipes of vegan chicken soup.
Right.
Something like that, yeah.
Do you have like a goal timeline for this? Like, is it like a 2-year project? What does it look like?
I think I'd like to get a manuscript done by next year.
Okay.
By fall of next year, so that it can be published sometime in early 2023.
Awesome.
So that would be the goal. But I'm throwing these dates out around, like we had all sorts of dates in line, for the first one, all of which were, in smithereens, thanks to me being a partner at a law firm and also COVID. And,
exactly.
Right.
That's so cool. We do have a couple of listener questions that I want to make sure to ask about as well.
The only
I got to pull them up for.
I'm like
memory
trying
here.
to stay on topic, but all I can think about right now is cryptocurrency.
Oh,
Okay,
cool.
well, let's go there. Let's go there. Fine.
You're
Well,
talking
you
to one
can
of the
hold off on these.
few persons who probably could talk crypto for a very long time.
The things that are on my mind are crypto, and you touched on spirituality a little bit, which is like something we never talk about on the podcast. But
We don't. We never go that deep on the podcast.
It doesn't have to be deep.
I just think your perspective is interesting, like nudges from the universe.
Yeah. So I think I was very religious growing up. My parents were incredibly, my mom was. My dad's like totally not actually, but my mom was. Like we went to
US
church.
religion?
Yeah, we went
Okay.
to church all throughout my life, and I grew up in the church. My first husband was through church. I mean, my whole social life was church. I was, praise team leader. I went to a church in college that is now considered a cult, apparently. I didn't know that at the time.
Which church is this?
Well, I went to the University of Illinois,
yeah.
and it's Covenant Fellowship Church. It has
Okay.
now fallen into bad repute.
Oh no.
But so I was very religious growing up. So spirituality, even in a very structured and dogmatic way, has been a part of my life, my whole life, right? So it's not something new to me. I had a break from, at least institutional religion during my first marriage. I felt like God had abandoned me and I was like, I'm abandoning you back, and so you just had that sort of kind of existential moment where I was like, this isn't working for me. And people can call it what they want to. But at the end of the day, I always feel like there is a God, and I think that God loves me. And wherever I end up going, it's kind of like he anchors me, and I can go as far away as I possibly want to and can. But at the end of the day, he kind of pulls me back, right? So that's kind of my very romantic notion of God. However, in the past year, especially after rereading Finding Ultra, I reread it for, homework for meeting Rich at the podcast. It's like, I am not going there.
I don't blame you. Yeah.
I was like, I am
Full
rereading his book.
preparation.
Yeah. So I reread his book, and, his wife is very spiritual, as you may know. Julie is very in touch with the kind of, the vibrations of the universe, if you will. And I think for a long time, I kind of was like, I'm too analytical for that. I don't believe in that. I'm too logical for that, and very skeptical. But I think maybe at that point in my life, I needed that sort of energy to take the risks that I was contemplating. And, reading his book and hearing sort of Julie's voice through that book, I remember I was running, I was training, right, for the marathon, and I was running, and I literally listened to this part where Julie was talking to Rich about him deciding to quit his law firm job, right, because he had a very successful practice, and and he wanted to really pursue ultra running at the time, and Julie was like, let me ask you a question. If you recover, he was in the hospital, I think, after an injury. He's like, if you recover from this, are you telling me you're going to give it up? You really are going to go back to being a lawyer and give up? You're not, right? And she said this in this way. And I've met Julie now a couple of times, and she is a very tough love persona. I mean, I think she comes off as very like loving, and she does have that sort of wonderful, nurturing, divine woman side to her. But there's also a very like no nonsense, no BS woman in her. And when I heard that, I was just like, this is the universe talking to me, I feel like. And I really need to start believing in this, whether it's real or not, for my own mental health. I needed to. And I think it's sort of wonderful and beautiful to believe in sort of the kind of loveliness of this idea that there is something out there that will protect you. And, one of the things that, and I'm paraphrasing, that Rich says in his book, and that I've heard now many, many times from him directly and from his team directly, is, the universe will protect those who serve the universe. And I love that idea. And that was really what ultimately kind of catapulted me into doing what I did. Because it was like, if it was just for like fame, fortune, money, and all of those things, then I would have been like, I don't know. But because it was for what I believe to be a greater purpose, which is spreading the message of compassion and empowerment to as many people as possible, then I did feel like, all right, I think at least to some measure, the universe will try and protect me as much as it can.
When I feel like if you're trying to do it for like popularity, you're not going to be as vulnerable. I wouldn't think. And that's what, in my opinion, is one of the main drivers of success, or at least like, something that would blow you up like that. I also think there is like a certain like, as a fellow, what is it, left or right brainer? Which one is
right?
Is
is creative, left is analytical.
Okay, as a fellow like left brainer, I think there is like an analytical portion of like the whole kind of. I don't know what you would even call it, like the hippie universe vibe.
I love that.
Well, because I used to get like, my mom is very right brainy and like all about how the universe will take care of you. And I was like, this is some dumb shit.
I don't know. The universe is going to F you over. That's what I used to think. Yeah.
Like you've never had a bus drive past you and hit a pothole with a puddle in it. But yeah, I think like when you were originally like kind of putting yourself out there, taking risks, I feel like when I've done that historically, you kind of like double down, and as you continue to keep having those risks being proven as successful, that's what kind of drew me to that line of thinking, where I'm like, oh, well, like it's happened X amount of times in the past, and that's something that I can count on in the future, probably.
I think that there's, a level of ownership, right? Like you should take stock of yourself and how much you bring to these opportunities, right? That was that great, maxim, which is like, luck is only you being prepared to take advantage of those opportunities, right? Like, so I think there's definitely something to that, but I don't want to gloss over this definition of, universe, spirituality, all of that, which is this other component that you have no control over, right? Like you do not control it. There's something extra to that is working normatively on your behalf. And I think that what's wrong with believing that? I mean, like, what's it going to hurt? Like, who's it going to hurt to believe that? Nobody. Like, it really doesn't hurt anyone to believe. I mean, maybe if you're delusional about it, but like, if you believe that there's a little sprinkling of that every once in a while in your life, I think that that's a good thing. Are you guys going to mint your NFTs now?
I'm holding myself off because I know I'm just going to talk about tattoos and spirituality. So Chris can get us back on track with crypto.
I mean, there's nothing to be on track for. We're just here to chat. Go. Yeah.
Cool.
Do you want to keep going down the spiritual route?
The rabbit hole is sure. Whatever you want.
It's not what I want.
I think it is what you want.
What does Joanne want?
What is Joanne?
I'm happy to chat about tattoos. I have 8 of them myself. I'm happy to chat about.
There we go.
Nice.
We can chat about crypto. We can chat about more spirituality. Whatever you gentlemen have in store.
It all sounds great.
I think our listeners would be interested in crypto. What closing questions do you have?
I should pull up the couple of listener closing questions. God,
okay. Oh yeah, we've done a disservice to our listeners.
So the worst part of doing podcasts is that they have to end, which honestly, it's my least favorite part because I feel like
I'm so glad
we very rarely have a guest where I don't want to just keep going forever. Basically.
Oh yeah.
Would you agree?
Yeah.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
I don't know. I love getting to know people, their stories, and this is the perfect avenue to do it.
I'm also just, that's why I'm notoriously late at work, because I'm just like, the last meeting we were just rambling for a little while. I'm like, sorry, it's kind of what I do at this point.
That's the best, to get the ramble.
Okay, so a question was, so especially lately, you've done a lot of news, media, podcasts, all these different things. What's been your favorite? And then has there been any that have been like super awkward or like it turned out poorly or anything like that?
I'll answer that first one first because it's the easier one. I did have one interview that I really didn't enjoy, and I felt like they were asking questions that were inappropriate. They were asking me about my firm mostly. Oh. And I was like, I don't represent my firm.
Yeah.
I represent me.
Yeah.
So I can't speak to what the firm does or thinks or feels about this stuff. I can tell you what my personal experience has been. And then they also started asking me about Donald Trump. And, I understand to a certain degree, that'll come up because of my writing on the topic, but they were asking again in connection with my employer. And I was like, I'm not going there.
It's like, why are you having me on? What is... You obviously have a fairly clear direction of like your personal brand, and that's like not at the forefront of it.
Well, and that's okay. Like, you know, people have different reasons for asking me questions. So it was a paper in the legal industry. And so I was very uncomfortable. But luckily my PA, you know, my publicist was like, hello, like she's not answering that. And then they followed up with the journalist to be like, we just want to make sure that, you know, it's very clear that Joanne doesn't represent the firm. You know, she represents the Korean vegan. And the article turned out great. Like, it was beautiful. It was perfect. You know, a couple of my other TikTok friends were featured as well. And it was great. So, you know, it wasn't the most comfortable experience, but ultimately it turned out fine. Yeah. Much harder is like, what is my favorite? Like, that is so hard. I have met incredible people, like unbelievable journalists, thought leaders, writers, activists, you know, people like Rich Roll. I mean, that's certainly an epoch, right? Like I was like a mess, like, but you know, Anthony can attest to it. I was a total disaster. And the thing is, I had a photographer from the LA Times come that morning, the same day of the podcast, to do a photo shoot for the, you know, the feature in the LA Times. And so I was just a complete basket case. And then it was like the most surreal thing. How do you explain to someone like, I'm actually going to be meeting this person that has had probably more influence on my life than anyone other than my parents, you know? Like, I don't even know like what to think or how to prepare. Like, what if he hates me? Like, what if he thinks I'm weird or like, you know? So, I mean, that whole podcast was amazing. I think the media, you know, the LA Times, Washington Post, you know, those two were amazing. You know, both because of the women who wrote them. You know, Steph, she's a lawyer. She's a fellow lawyer. She's a novelist. And so and she's Korean American. So to talk to her at that level was incredibly rewarding. And she wrote this piece that just, you know, made me cry. And it was the same thing with Monica. You know, she came to our house. She's sitting at this dining table. We made her an entirely Korean meal. And we got to hang out with her for like 3.5 hours. She like lives down the block, apparently. And, you know, again, you know, I got very emotional during that conversation because she's such an incredibly inviting, warm woman. So it's very hard to pick and choose, but I've been very fortunate to meet incredible writers and journalists and you know, people who make an impact in a way that I could only dream of doing. And that's the most rewarding part about these types of pieces.
Yeah. And do you find enjoyment? So you've described yourself as being, I guess, more like you've had to come out of your shell over time and learn to be out there a little bit more. So is this enjoyable, this process of really promoting the book and just nonstop back to back to back and all this piece of it? Or is it like, is it very tiring and you're like, this is so much and you really would rather just be working on the next book or, you know, doing more content behind the scenes?
Well, enjoyable and tiring are not mutually exclusive.
Very true. Very true.
Like when you go to Great America and you're having the time of your life, standing in line and going on these roller coasters, at the end of the day, you're like, oh my God, I'm so tired. You know, you sleep in the next morning. It's the same thing, right? You can go on a bender at night and hope to God that you don't have to wake up, right? So like those things are not mutually exclusive. So I'm having a wonderful time with the book tour, you know, certainly meeting all these journalists and meeting all these cool people. Like, better part about it is meeting my followers. Like, that has been so amazing. Like, seeing my community in person at some of these book signings and book events and getting to hear their stories and talk to them is like indescribable to me. So of course that's very fun, but I'm also like now at a point where I'm like, okay, I really need to focus on my health. You know, I need to focus on like, you know, recovering from that because it was a marathon in a different way.
Right.
And so I'm really happy that I get to be at home for a stretch of time. I mean, I'm going out of town next week, but hopefully not for very long. But, you know, I get to create content, do things that are sort of like my bread and butter when it comes to the Korean vegan.
Yeah. Another question was on speaking of, you know, being in the public eye, the criticism as well. Anytime that you have 1 million views on a video anywhere, you're going to have a ton of haters.
You guys know.
I mean, we got haters. We got, you know,
we don't have 1 million views, but we have haters.
But we have haters. Don't worry, we have haters. But yeah, dealing with that, I guess, and maybe even comparing how you dealt with that 4 or 5 years ago versus now, where you've matured a lot in the process and probably have had some ways to learn to cope with it over time.
I think that it's funny. Like for most of the Korean vegans' existence, I didn't have a lot of negativity. Like I just didn't, because it didn't have a lot of play. Like it wasn't being viewed enough where just statistically speaking, I wasn't just getting, enough views to merit that kind of trolling and negativity. And to the extent it did happen, it was so infrequently that I was like, okay, like whatever,
whatever, one bad comment for 99 good ones.
Exactly. I'm not going to pay attention. In the last year, it's become much more frequent, personal, and more hurtful, very much more hurtful. And in some cases, like downright disgusting and violent, I'm like,
you get into like the 1% of 1% of people who are just like
attacking,
like
pretty
literally
evil,
like sick. I feel like they're mentally unstable, and the internet allows them to do whatever they want. They can say whatever they want. They can, put things into my DMs and, it's horrible. And I don't know really, like I wish I could say that I had a really good answer to it, but Anthony can attest to the fact that he can probably tell by now, oh, you must have had a bad comment on one of your things, or you must have got an ugly DM, because it really does bring me down sometimes for the whole day, sometimes
there's
longer.
Not, like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, etc. Like they don't have good troll control, really.
Well, I mean, I think it's because it's so hard to tell the difference between trolling and something that might be constructive or, might actually be a contribution to a dialogue that needs to happen. And I'm open to that as a lawyer. I know what that is. I try to continue to tell myself, don't take this personally, all of those things. At the end of the day, if I want to be engaged with the good, then unfortunately I need to be exposed to the bad.
Yeah.
So I need to learn how to kind of grow a thicker skin to the bad while remaining open to the good. And that's the challenge. I could easily just shut myself off.
Yeah.
But then I do
never look at comments ever again.
But then I do it completely, and what a horrible thing that would be for the community, right?
Yeah.
So that's just unfortunately reality. And what that means is realistically, every once in a while, I'm not going to be happy. I'm just going to be upset. I'm going to get angry, or I'm going to get hurt. And that's just the cost of doing what I do, unfortunately. I have a therapist.
The human experience.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
never going to be perfect, and that's okay.
Yeah. I know some people just won't look at any of the comments, but it's like, well, then you're missing out on connecting with your audience, and that's like such a big piece of it. So you might be saving yourself from a couple comments, but you're missing out on a lot of opportunity.
I mean, and if that's what you want, that's totally okay.
Yeah.
If you're the Betty Crocker of the world, then
you don't need the extra.
Exactly.
I mean, I like compare that to a roller coaster where like, well, do you just want to go the same level, or do you want to go up and down? And I feel like up and down's kind of fun.
It is. It can be fun. And it can be fun.
As long as you have somebody telling you that it's a roller coaster.
Or you have your seatbelt on.
Exactly. Yeah.
Those are the couple of main listener questions that we had come in here. Do you have any other closing questions?
That was like so pure and wholehearted that maybe we just end there.
I think that's all right.
No words of wisdom.
Where can the people find you? I mean, I think it's pretty easy at this point. So we'll in the description of
you're listening
wherever you're listening, YouTube or Spotify or Apple Podcasts, we'll have a link to the book in the description, link to the socials, link to the website.
Yeah, it's the Korean vegan. It's pretty easy.
Pretty simple to find. So Adam and I always do our attempt at words of wisdom at the close of a podcast. Do you have any words of wisdom for our listeners? And it doesn't have to be serious words of wisdom too. You can mess with them if you want.
I do. I'm not good at the messing with people, at least not out of direction. I would say like, this is like something that I said a long time ago in one of my earlier TikToks, and that I actually go back to a lot because I wish I had told myself this when I was younger, which is, think less about what soothes your fear and more about what brings you joy in the things that you do. I think it's important to think about both, but I think so many of us think too much about what soothes our fear and not enough about the things that bring us actual joy, whether it's in our career, in our family, and relationships, all of those things. I think if we spent a little bit more time putting the thumb on the scale on the side of joy and less on the side of fear, we might do things totally differently.
I love that.
I like that. That's good.
Then I just need you, last thing is I just need you to sign my book.
I'm happy to sign the book.
I knew it.
Awesome. Well, thanks for tuning in, everybody. Thank you, Joanne, for
Thank
coming
you for
on.
having me. It was
This
such
was a pleasure.
pleasure.
Oh, pleasure's all ours.
It was
Yeah.
so fun. Now
Thank
we get
you.
to eat some pudechige.
Let's do
I'm
it.
excited.
All right.
Awesome.
Thanks so much for tuning into our conversation with Joanne Molinaro, the Korean vegan. Hope this one was thought-provoking for you and leaving you with a little bit of inspiration for the day. Make sure to follow us on social channels. We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we're on TikTok, we're everywhere at Beer Mile. We're also on Patreon, patreon.com/Beer Mile if you'd like access to even more content and behind the scenes, uncut, uncensored, exclusive giveaways, you name it, we've got it. We'd also really appreciate if you could head over to Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star podcast review so we can keep this thing going. Thanks again, Joanne, for cooking for us, for inviting us into your home. You are an amazing friend and an inspiration for all of us out here. We've got a link to her book, The Korean Vegan, in the description. So take a look at that, and we hope you all have a wonderful day. See you next week on another episode of the Beer Mile Podcast. Peace.